Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Wendy Webster Coakley, and I'm the class of 85, and I'm also overseeing alumni career networking here at the college. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinars. Just a few reminders before we get started. As you can see in the chat, that is your space to, as you probably know, after 2 years of Zoom, to connect with one another, share reflections in real time. Just double check that you've selected everyone in the chat drop down so that your comments can be seen by everyone. Because if you just do panelists, there'll be 3 of us who will see it, and your wisdom needs a bigger platform. What's the one thing we don't put in the chat? Profanity, of course, but also questions, your questions. Having seen Alison's presentation already, I'm sure some of you will have questions. And I know that Alison wants to be able to answer your questions, as many of them as she can at the end of the presentation. So the way to ensure that your question gets added to the list is to put it in the Q&A function. So take a moment to locate that icon at the bottom of your screen. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Alison LaRocca, class of 2006. She's president and CEO of Luminary Evaluation Group. Alison is going to be sharing more about her professional journey as she tees up her presentation, so I'm not going to read her official bio. However, I thought that I would quickly share a few key aspects about her Williams experience, the things that all of the alumni watching can relate to. So Alison's first year entry was Williams A, or Willie A, as the kids call it now. Her major was history, and if there are any WeBo alumni out there, she did spend her junior year at Oxford. Her favorite extracurricular was dance, and in fact, she won the Hutchinson Fellowship for Dance at graduation, so that is a big deal. And finally, and perhaps most important, her go-to snack bar order was mozzarella sticks. So Alison, I suspect you may have some snack bar soulmates out there, and I'm going to yield the floor to you now, and I will see you for the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Wendy. And I just want to thank Wendy and Caitlin and Alumni Relations for helping me to get ready for this presentation. They made it really smooth and easy and did a wonderful job with the preparation. So thank you, and thank you for Williams for this opportunity to share. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So today's presentation is called Distill the Data: How to Tell a Nonprofit Social Story with Existing Resources and Effective Practices. So for all of you nonprofit people who are working with nonprofits or connected to them in some way, this is really an opportunity for us to talk about, what do you do with your data? How do you collect it? And why does it matter? So our goals for today is really going to be understanding program data and its role in helping a nonprofit grow its impact and generate support. Thinking together about how nonprofits can leverage existing data while enhancing practices with current staff and resources. And then also learning how to tell and communicate a compelling social impact story, drawing from both qualitative and quantitative data sources. So as Wendy mentioned, my name is Alison LaRocca. I am class of 2006. My husband is Roger LaRocca, class of 2005. We currently live in the Berkshires. I was born and raised in the Berkshires, and so we're really happy to be back living here, raising our 2 wonderful children. And after Williams, I did in fact have a dance fellowship, and I went to New York and trained for a while, and then determined that I wanted to go into teaching. So I was a teacher at the Community Day Charter Public School in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and I taught 3rd grade for about 6 years. Then upon leaving the classroom, I was introduced to Gary Romano, who is the president and CEO of Civitas Strategies, which is our sister company, and began to do some management consulting. And through that work, it grew into the evaluation work that I'm doing today. I've been doing evaluation for about 15 years. I've been doing it for all different kinds of organizations of all sizes nationally. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that's a little bit about me. So Luminary Evaluation Group. So we are an evaluation firm that supports mission-driven organizations. As I mentioned, this firm grew out of the management consulting work that I was doing. And what happened was, we had clients who were saying to us, we have to do this thing called program evaluation. We're not really sure what to do, how to do it. Does it mean that we have to go and, spend all this, money to figure out how to have, a multi-year process that's time intensive and expensive. And so we thought, we can help our clients do this evaluation work and really look at it from a management consulting lens. So helping people to, really have actionable real-time data that they're getting back quickly. And so that's where Luminary was born. The services that we offer are formative and summative program evaluation, process evaluation, evaluation capacity building, which is one of my favorite things to do with organizations, helping them to really realize their own power to look at data and to communicate it. And then finally, model capture, which is really looking at programs and articulating how they work, what they do, so that they can be replicated and scaled. So our clients that I work with are nonprofits all over the country. We really work with any mission-driven organization, particularly in early childhood education. We work with an organization in Detroit focused on, serving homeless populations and of families. We work with schools. We work with funders who have grantees that are looking to understand their data impact. So really just a breadth of organizations of every shape and size and location. So today's first big idea is really thinking about program data and how it's really key to nonprofit growth. So thinking about the nonprofit sector, we know that there's about 1.6 million tax-exempt organizations across the country, and that's a lot. I know here in the Berkshires, we have a tremendous number of nonprofits who are all, doing really important work. And so there has been this really explosive growth in the nonprofit sector over the last 20 years. Externally, we find that their needs are increasing through the pandemic and resources are limited as people are competing for funding. So we're seeing, there's an amount of funding available, and we're seeing a lot of nonprofits eager to capture that funding and are looking for the best way to be competitive to do so. We also see that, during the pandemic, a number of organizations really slimmed down. And now they're all trying to rebuild, and they often have tight budgets. They are experiencing the same staffing shortages that other sectors and organizations are also experiencing. So it's a really competitive market out there right now for nonprofits. And so we find that organizations with strong program data really have an advantage in this environment. I like to tell people that when you have programmatic data, whether it's a little bit of programmatic data or a lot of programmatic data, it can really help with your decision making and prioritizing what direction to take things in. And this is especially true after the pandemic, because I think, organizations have really had to shift their focus, their programming. I've seen organizations who have come up with these amazing innovations in response to the pandemic, many of them virtual, moving programming to be more efficient, to reach more people in a virtual way. And they're interested in continuing some of those innovations. Others are really interested in perhaps doing a hybrid model or reinstating some of their in-person activities from before the pandemic. So, I think that programmatic data can really help with navigating those decisions. Donors and funders who are interested in supporting nonprofits, they really look at a nonprofit the way a private investor might look at what they're investing in. They're looking for results. effectiveness, and impact. And then we see this overall desire for evidence. And this is true for multiple audiences that engage with a nonprofit. They want to see that a program is achieving outcomes, that they are operating and producing programming along established timelines. And for many nonprofits, they are working within financial terms. So many nonprofits are already doing data collection and analysis because of the level of reporting that they're having to do as a requirement of their funding. So as you're thinking about, what does program data mean to different audiences, I think it's really important to remember that they all have one thing in common. They want good data to understand your organization and all of the great work that you're doing. And so for a board, program data and evaluation results can really offer clarity around the impact that their organization is having. I think for board members who are trying to talk about the work that's happening at their organization, having those lines, the elevator pitch, and having that be supported by program data can be really critical in partnership formation and generating support locally and nationally for their organization. For staff, program data can mean that they're celebrating their successes, and they're also identifying areas for enhancement and opportunity. When you stop and really look at the data and what it means, it can just give you that, that boost that your staff needs to be able to have clear direction for the opportunities that are in front of them. For funders, you're helping funders understand that you're committed to measuring impact and that they're making a solid investment in your organization. For community, so, I see a lot of organizations that are doing this amazing work, and they might be doing it right next to another organization that's doing similar work, or there might be opportunities for synergy that those organizations never even knew about. So when you really look at program data and communicate that data and impact, you're encouraging community engagement and really highlighting opportunities for partnership and synergy. For the field, so when you contribute to the body of knowledge in your field, it can really elevate an organization as a thought leader. So having that intellectual contribution to moving the field forward is a significant value that can generate more interest in a nonprofit. And then finally, legislators, they're essential to advocacy efforts, and giving them evaluation and impact data can really serve as an important guidepost as they're making decisions for policy. So now that we've kind of thought about what program data can do and why it's important, the next big idea is to start to think about your organization's experience with program data. So, what does it mean to you? And how can you start to build your understanding and usage of data? So I like to think about program data at 4 levels. And so at the first level, level 1, that's really thinking about internal data analysis and collection. And so this is, the entry point for most nonprofits who are starting to think about improving their data practices and getting into more work around data. So internal data, the benefits of it is you're utilizing existing resources and you're supporting communications and real-time decision makings. So, in absence of having data, you're starting to have information that you can share with people about the intention behind your program and also some of the accomplishments that your program is having. Some of the challenges with internal data analysis is that you're not really having somebody independently come in and verify those results. Next, we have what I call independent review. So this is for organizations who might, they might have some data in existence. And I'm thinking of one organization that I worked with. They had just file cabinets of surveys and observation checklists. And they had them for, a number of years that their program had been in existence. They didn't really know what to do with that data, but they had it and they kept collecting it. And so having an independent review of that data allows somebody to come in, take a look at it. We were able to digitize that data by helping them to build. One of their staff was able to enter it into SurveyMonkey, and then we were able to look at it all and think about what it all means. So that adds gravitas to the existing data that you have, and it also gives you that independent eye to take a look at it, as well as your collection processes. Next on the pyramid here is level 3 independent evaluation. And this is really something that I do a lot for organizations. And this is where we're looking at existing data that people might already have, supplemented with original collection. So I practice participatory evaluation, meaning that, I think it's really important for organizations to be able to bring their wisdom to the table when we're talking about data collection, when we are, designing protocols, because organizations are the people who really know the work, right? I can come in and I can offer expertise as an evaluator, but in terms of the on the ground experience, organizations really do have that level of expertise that needs to be considered when building evaluation work. And so this is a really great opportunity to partner with organizations to do that, look at what they have, and then also collect more data to supplement that. This level of evaluation really does provide that independent authentication and analysis. The challenges with this one is it does become a bit more costly when you think about, the level of input and design and that goes into a project like this. And then finally, at the top of the pyramid, we have level 4, randomized controlled trial, or RCT, and similar evaluations. So in this level, data is independent, but the costs in time and money are very high for a project like this. So in my research, I found that about 2% of nonprofits have the opportunity to engage in randomized controlled trials. I do not do randomized controlled trials. I think that, that's not quite what I am, the population that I'm serving are organizations who can do that work. I do think that they're rigorous. They can be high cost and time intensive. And on the next slide, I'll talk about, what some of the challenges and benefits are of engaging in that level 4 work. So as we think about, the randomized controlled trial and its benefits and challenges, I look to an organization called Urban Alliance, and they are a college readiness organization in Washington, D.C., and they have locations all over the country, but they engaged the Urban Institute a few years ago to work on a study. This study cost $1.2 million, and it spanned over 6 years. There was an interesting article about this project in the Nonprofit Quarterly, and they spoke about their experience with going through this kind of a process. The good thing about their experience was that, the evaluation found statistically significant impact for the model. It helped the Urban Alliance to win Investing in Innovation I3 grant, and which meant that it could expand sites and services. So they came out of the process feeling, like it was really worth it because they had this data to really show that their model worked. Some of the challenges that they experienced was that, they weren't quite ready for what it meant to go through an RCT. So, when you're working on an RCT, there's groups of people who you're serving who are going to be part of that group that's receiving the intervention, but then there's also groups that are not going to receive the intervention, that control group. And so they found that it was really difficult to recruit for those students who would not be receiving the intervention. They found that people got really upset in the community that, these students would otherwise qualify for that programming and they couldn't receive that. Staffing levels, there is a lot of work that is entailed with conducting a randomized controlled trial. So they caution to make sure that you're ready for that. Stories behind the numbers, I think that we all have those amazing impact stories that we think, wow, this changed a person's life, this work. But then I think that, sometimes when you have the numbers, that they don't always match up with those stories. And so things that we think are really working might not be in the sense that we see them in a study like this. So all of that is to say, randomized controlled trials are great. When they have results that are positive, it really can propel an organization forward. There's a lot of risks that go into them. So I think that organizations who are considering them should also think about that it's not randomized controlled trial or nothing. And that's why we want to make sure that we're really looking at the full body of evaluation work that is available. So then an example of level 3 evaluation work is independent evaluation. One example that I wanted to share today was a project that was funded by the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative in New Jersey. So at the beginning of the pandemic, in March of 2020, we learned that, there would be support for small businesses, the Paycheck Protection Program, and that it would mean that organizations could get money to help support their workforce and keep people employed. There was a lot of concern that childcare providers would not be able to access this funding to navigate this application system on their own. And so a TA program was designed and operated by Civitas Strategies that connected childcare providers, to the help and support they needed to engage in the PPP application process, along with other federal funding sources like Employee Retention Tax Credit and Families First. And so Luminary did the evaluation for that project. And we found that for 242 New Jersey childcare businesses, that over $18 million in federal stimulus money was leveraged for them, meaning that they were applying for PPP and these other federal programs, and generated $18 million through that work. If they had not had that technical assistance support, that money would have likely been left on the table. This was a rapid cycle, independently collected data project. I think that the benefit of something like this is we did this in about 9 months and it offered recommendations for policymakers to really start to shape near-term and long-term future investments and ideas about how to support childcare providers long-term. Level 2. This is the independent review. An example of this one is the Hunts Point Alliance for Children. They're an organization in New York, and they had established their Family School Skills Program and had an initial pilot program where it was studied by a professor at NYU. And after 5 years, they were running this program. They had a lot of self-collected data and they didn't know what to do with it, but they knew that they wanted to scale their program and that they wanted to be able to apply for other funders. That they wanted to be able to show that the program was working. What we did was we came in and we took a look at all of the data they had. We help them to really understand what to do with the data moving forward, how to assess it, how to, put it all together so it had some meaning. And we were able to help them produce a report that they could then use to scale and continue their program. And then finally, level 1 internal evaluation. And this is what I want to focus on for the rest of our conversation today. This is really the internal evaluation component. And I look to one of our recent clients, Quality Care for Children. They're an amazing organization that serves Georgia, and they help childcare providers really build their capacity for business operations to really understand how they can grow their businesses through a number of different supports. But in this case, we were looking at the Staff Family Childcare Network. They were entering year 2 of this initiative, and a Staff Family Childcare Network is this collaborative where childcare providers are coming together. They're receiving help with things like how to build a budget. They're working on how to create automated billing, how to really think about all of those things that as small businesses, we sometimes take for granted that providers just aren't aware of yet. And so they had a significant amount of self-collected data. And as we worked with them, we really thought about how to refine their inquiry process and build additional qualitative components. So they're an organization, they didn't want to have a large evaluation, but they really did want to do something effective to communicate their impact and their data. They were able to come up with an evaluation plan that uses their current staff and resources. And it was a very empowering experience for the staff because it allowed them to recognize the importance of data at the outset of their program. And so now, even if down the road they do decide that they want to have some external work done on their data, they've got something to start with. And that's very important because you can never go back to the beginning of a program, right? That window is very small. So that was an opportunity for them to really take that time to look at their data at the beginning and make a plan for how it will impact their growth moving forward. So this opportunity space that we think about is this level 1 internal evaluation. If you're an organization out there who has never really done evaluation work before, if you're a funder and you're thinking about your grantees who maybe have some great programming but don't have the outcomes or the measurement to really show what they're doing, this is a really great opportunity space for them. And it has internal and external value. It leverages existing data, but it's really important to remember that there are asterisks when you're looking at internal data. So remember, this is you, the organization, saying, this is what we're doing, and this is what we think is happening. So big idea 3. So how do you engage in effective internal evaluation practices? So I'm going to show you a 4-step process for how to do that internal evaluation work. But before we do, I want to make sure that people have some ideas about what it means before you go into it. So thinking about evaluation at launch is really important, as I mentioned on the previous slide. You can never go back in time to collect that initial information before a program. So designing your evaluation or your data collection work at the beginning is really important. I was at a conference the other week, and we were learning about some of the incredible evaluation and data collection work that a program was doing internally to assess a new initiative that they had. And, I looked around the room, and there were other organizations there who just were thinking to themselves, I don't think I can do this because I don't have that level of investment in this data work. And so, there is this tendency to just kind of not do it. then, but I think that, you know, when you take incremental steps towards, you know, engaging in data and building practices, it's really important. And so I would encourage everybody who's thinking, well, I don't have the capacity or the expertise to do data, really think about what you have to start with, existing data that's available, and think about how you can apply that to your program design and your collection moving forward. It's really important to use a team approach for this. Nonprofits have, you know, pretty small staffing windows to build on extra work. So I think it's really great to make sure that you're not doing this in a silo, that you're really engaging your fellow teammates. Starting with what you have, really take inventory. You know, if you have surveys, if you have interviews, if you have videos of work, that's all data that you want to make sure you know where it is, even if you don't know how to use it quite yet. Have a clear scope, making sure that you really know like what you're trying to do, right? Having deadlines and milestones as part of any evaluation effort is really important. And then, you know, making sure that you are communicating throughout the process, that if you do need help, that you're finding somebody who is an expert, who could even just advise you or take a look at what you're building and give you some advice there. And then finally, when you're done with the whole thing, make sure that you're promoting your results. It's, you know, I see a lot of organizations that do these incredible efforts, and they have, you know, really important messages and reports that they've created, and then they're not quite sure how to share them or what to do with them. So really making sure at the outset that you know what you want to do with your results once you have them. So the 4 phases of internal evaluation, as I think about them, are define and design, collect, analyze, and report. So when you're defining and designing, you're really thinking about your driving questions and those metrics that you're going to use to answer them. In this phase, you're going to design your data collection protocols and make sure that the questions are really aligned with those driving questions. Then you're going to collect. You're going to go out there and collect that data in a thoughtful and systematic way. Then you're going to analyze the data to try to find those key observations and next steps. And then finally, you want to report and share your impact. So in phase 1, when we think about designing, I always tell people to really try to keep it to 4 or 5 key questions and measures that are going to drive the entire process of inquiry. So, you know, thinking about what is the primary objective of your program, what are you trying to achieve, what do you want to articulate about the program's impact, and thinking about those audiences that we looked at the beginning, to funders, the community, to the field, and then are there funding requirements that you have that you're already doing, and you know what information would funders find valuable? And this is the time when you can really think about your list of existing data that you came up with when you were planning your evaluation efforts. Here's an example of how I might organize the driving questions and measures. And I'm not going to read through this whole table, but you can see that there's a key question. Then there's a set of impact metrics that you're looking at to try to understand the answer to the question. Your source, where you got it from, whether this is an existing metric or existing data source that you've already had, or if it's one that you're going to be building that's new. And also the timing of when you're going to collect this data, if it's during programming throughout, or if it's a pre and post situation where you're looking at it before the intervention, and then how the situation or impact has changed after the intervention. In phase 2, this is where you're really collecting all of that original data to supplement what you already have. So I like to think about three main areas of data. So surveys, interviews, and focus groups. And these tend to be pretty qualitative, but they really do help to tell your social impact story. Think about surveys as a way to reach a broad population, right? Because if you're doing a survey online, you can send that survey out to as many people as you need to. You can think about measuring change with surveys. You can do it before and after. I've seen some organizations who use the initial survey as like an intake form. And in that case, they're able to ask a few more questions because it is a mandatory experience to participate in the program. If it's not a mandatory endeavor to collect a survey from people, I would keep it very brief, definitely under 5 minutes if possible. Then we have interviews. So one-on-one interviews are a way to gain individual perspectives, stories, and backgrounds of participants. I always find the interviews in any data collection effort as being very grounding, and often I start with interviews when I'm looking through the data at the end, because it really helps you to understand what are the trends that you're seeing across those conversations. With any given evaluation project, I usually recommend having about 15 to 20 conversations. And you can include a different number of stakeholders from different groups in those conversations. So you might be talking to staff of a program, you might be talking to the families who participate. You might be talking to community leaders to understand their perspective on the landscape and why programming is needed or how it could be improved. And then we have focus groups. Focus groups are that opportunity where you can really get people together who can start to ideate and problem solve about programming. So they're sharing their attitudes and experiences, and they're working together in a group to really think about a program and how it can be improved, and also what they like about it. And so usually I have about 2 to 3 focus groups for a project, and convene about 5 to 8 people in those groups. These can be virtual or in person. It's interesting because before the pandemic, focus groups were really something we did in person. And so, that was a bit more of a cost and an intensive experience for organizations. But given, the experience people have had during the pandemic of working virtually, we've been able to do a lot more focus groups online. And still have that quality data collection experience. So all of these working together really help you to build a robust qualitative data set that then can complement the quantitative data that people are usually already collecting. So as you are collecting data and designing your data work, it's really important not to forget the stories. If you think about the evaluation that we just did with the childcare providers in New Jersey, we actually asked their permission to collect their stories, to write them. We had them review their stories. And then once we had their permissions, their edits, their revisions, we included those stories in our evaluation reports. And, they just add so much richness to the work that's happening for a program that's really critical to do that storytelling as well. You had providers who were talking about how they closed their doors, and they had so much information, it was overwhelming. And the webinars and the TA experience that they had helped them to not just survive the pandemic, but also taught them how to run their businesses more effectively and efficiently. And so, this is a snippet from one of our stories that we have, but those stories really make the data come to life. And so I just caution everyone not to forget them as you're building your protocols. So then we move into phase 3, where we're putting it all together. So you're exporting your results, you're conducting a SWOT analysis with your team, and you're identifying observations and creating an outline. And, thinking about the team approach to this, a SWOT analysis is a really great way to get together with your group, because there can be a sea of data that you're trying to navigate, and it can be overwhelming. So what I like to tell people is take a minute, look through the data, read through the data first, all of the different sources you have, and then get together with your team and do a SWOT. Think about what are the strengths that you're seeing in the data. What are some of the weaknesses that could be improved? What are some of the opportunities that you want to achieve in the future? And what are some of the threats out there that are putting your program at risk? And it just helps you to really organize your thinking. Then, as we think about putting it all together, you're really building an outline, right? So from that SWOT analysis, you're thinking about what are the 3 to 5 main observations that are going to structure your report, right? So you're looking for the most deeply woven themes and important takeaways from the headlines. Once you have those 3 to 5 main observations, then you can really think about, okay, so now I can color in the lines with some of the evidence that is going to support those. This is where you're going to add your quotes from surveys, interviews, and focus groups, and you're going to add additional evidence and supporting observations from artifacts and background. And then most importantly, you're going to think about recommendations and next steps. So what is all of this data put together telling you to do next with your programming? And then finally, thinking about the report. And if you've done a strong analysis, the report writing is not as scary, right? It's already put together in terms of your ideas, it's organized, and now you just have to write. And so on this slide, I give a suggestion about how you might want to structure an evaluation report. So thinking about the title page, table of contents, an executive summary, which is something that should be able to stand on its own, including those really important observations. If you were just to give somebody, a short 2 to 3 page summary of your evaluation report, you would want it to be in that executive summary. An introduction is an opportunity to go more deeply into your program, what it is, what are the components of your program, what is the history of your program, your evaluation methodology, which is where you talk about how you collected the data, what are the protocols that you built, how did your team do it? Then you get into the observations, and this is where you're going to include that information about your headlines and then all of that evidence that you've put together underneath it. And then your opportunities and next steps, which are the recommendations, what the data is telling you to do next. And then finally, a conclusion, and not forgetting to include information about your organization and the people who worked to put this report together. As you are thinking about reporting, I always urge people not to forget graphic design. Graphic design can really add polish to a report. It can make it visually appealing and easier to read. These are just some examples of some pages from evaluation reports that we've issued. And they really just add an extra element of engagement to the information that you have. And finally, sharing your results. Once you have your report ready, it's really important not to keep it a secret. Do not put it on the shelf and say, well, that was an important endeavor, but we don't really know what to do with it now. So think about your audiences that we thought about at the beginning. And I would love to know, what these different audiences might find valuable from a report like this. So as we're thinking together about questions and having our discussion next, I'd love to hear about some of these different audiences. And if you have thoughts or questions about what people might find valuable from a report like this. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Wendy to think about questions or comments. And I know that slides will be available to everyone afterwards. If you do want to contact me, my information is there, and I'm happy to chat with anybody about your process and your questions.
Thank you, Allison. That was amazing. So we have some questions, and I'm just going to dive right in. The first one is from Robin Nydorf. I apologize, Robin, if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. And she says, I consult with a lot of nonprofits that are terrified of learning that the data won't reinforce their message, and so put up a lot of passive resistance to evaluation. They say they want to do it, but they don't really want to, and unconsciously undermine the process, not investing the time, insisting that they need to get to a different development place, just not prioritizing it. Sometimes overcoming this passive resistance is the hardest part. Any suggestions on how to overcome it?
I mean, I think that is just a really important fear that nonprofits have. You know, what if they go through this process and it comes out that their model doesn't work, right? And so they're like, I just don't want to touch that. But I think, you know, I really approach my evaluation work from a participatory point of view. You know, I think that when we were first starting the evaluation firm, people had this experience with evaluators that would come in, they would look at everything, they would, you know, write up a report, they would give the organization the report, and then they say, thanks very much, let us know if you have any questions. And I think it's really important not to work that way. So when we do evaluations, I think it's great to have a team that is, you know, on the staff at the organization. Let them help write the questions. Let them help to, you know, really think through the data. Sometimes we do an evaluation review team with our clients where we're showing them, here's what we've heard about the data. What do you all think about this? And how can we share this information in a way that's strengths-based and that is productive to the organization? Because there's always going to be areas for improvement for organizations, but it's the way that they're framed in a report, you know, that it's an opportunity rather than a failing. Right. And so I think, you know, helping organizations to think about evaluation from that lens is important. I also think it's really important to pick the right evaluator that is going to work with the client to build things together and not build it for them.
Okay. Well, our next question is from Jonathan Scott, and he says, can you talk about what I call the evaluation measuring trap? That is the funder, donor, grantee back and forth, also influenced by independent charity ratings firms, by which each donor must duplicate the same due diligence that most of the others are doing, where donors are trained to expect metrics for things that are inherently unmeasurable, and where programs are designed more for evaluation than for real world impact, when in many cases, unrestricted funding could be much more impactful. Thinking in particular about the work of social change versus social service nonprofits operating within a paradigm where one size fits all evaluations and metric frames don't allow for much difference between the two or between differing theories of change. How can we avoid the trap of evaluation for evaluation's sake?
Absolutely. I think that's really important. And, you know, I think that when you are building a program, right, having a logic model at the very beginning that is going to tell you about exactly what you're putting in to a program, the activities that you are engaging in, the short-term outcomes, the long-term outcomes, and then those long-term impacts. I think that's a really important thing to agree on up front for organizations and funders. You know, one of the first things that we do when we work with an organization on an evaluation to say, what's your logic model? And if they don't have one, work with them to build one, because the logic model is really what's driving the inquiry. And I also think not doing it in a vacuum is really important. So if you have funders who are really interested in seeing certain results, asking them to be part of that design process can really help organizations to have really clear expectations on both sides, right? What it is that they're going to do, what's realistic for them to do, and then what it is that the funder expects to see, and having those conversations up front instead of after the program is already running, or everybody's kind of on a different page with that. I think this is a really complicated question, and I'd be happy to go through it offline and talk more about it. But I really think it's about setting those expectations up front together and collaboratively to avoid some of that evaluation for evaluation's sake.
Okay. So now we have one from Shelley Terrell Herman, and she has a question specifically about the survey recommendation. She said it should be no longer than 5 minutes because otherwise they're not likely to finish or return it. How do I relay the proof that the survey to be this short? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think surveys are tricky, right? Because I don't know about all of you, but I have found that there are so many surveys out there right now, and people are just surveyed out. And I think it depends on the audience, right, that you're surveying. So if you're sending out a survey to families, for example, because you want to know about, just their experience or their needs, I think it's really important to keep something like that under 5 minutes and only ask the most important questions, right? Save some of the other questions for the interviews or for the focus groups, but really think about, what is it you want to know, because you'll see engagement start to drop off. Right now, let's say you're surveying somebody as part of an evaluation because they're a grantee and they've been funded, right? And this evaluation survey is part of their reporting process. Okay, then in that case, you're going to want it to be a little bit longer because it is more of a required experience. So I think you have to kind of gauge, like, when it's a required experience, it's going to be more time intensive, and that's okay. But when you're just asking people to give their time, you want to be respectful of that time and keep it short.
Great. So now we have a question from a former colleague of mine, Joya Yorgi, and she says, my understanding is that a strong logic model includes evaluation of medium long-term outcomes and impacts. How do you see this type of evaluation being integrated into the reports or assessment processes you work on?
Yeah, I think, as I said, I think logic models are so important because they are this visual way to ground your thinking about a program. I mean, because you're forced to put it on one page, right? And it really creates a streamlined way to think about programming. I also think it helps organizations think about, what's realistic, right, in terms of what's going to happen in the short term, and then all the way up to how does your intervention help change the world, right? And so when given the opportunity, I always engage organizations in doing that logic model right up front, especially if they're already running a program and they know what it looks like. That can just really shape the rest of the evaluation activities. So I think it's critical to do that right up front.
Thanks for that question, Joya. Now we have one from one of our favorite alumni volunteers, Lisa Russell-Mina. Can you talk a bit about the concept of return on investment, or ROI? Often our work is about students gaining skills and confidence, and those aren't always quantifiable.
I think that's a really great question. So anytime that you can kind of quantify how much money something is saving or making by an intervention, the better. So for example, that New Jersey evaluation I was talking about, we were able to say that, this investment raised $18 million, and it was a pretty significant ROI of a few dollars per every dollar put in. Now, when you can't do that, because I agree with you, it is really hard to measure that when you're looking at the acquisition of skills. But is there a way to draw that out, right? Is there a way to look at, how much money is being saved if people are, for example, getting on a career pathway that's going to offer them a livable wage as they progress through their life. And is there a way to quantify that? Often there are, and you can kind of investigate those methods online. But I think in absence of that, being able to show change from point A to point B within your evaluation efforts is another way to do that. And then pairing that with the stories that you collect. I just think it's really important also to be realistic about ROI and not promise these remarkable changes, and to be really realistic about what you're setting out to accomplish.
Okay, and it looks like we have time for just one more question. And Robin Nydorf actually sent in a follow-up when she had that question about resistance, overcoming resistance. And she says, another type of resistance is that the work is emotional. For example, changing hearts and minds, deepening connection to a topic or issue. And many clients simply don't believe that it can be evaluated. So sort of related to what Lisa was saying, how do you educate stakeholders who come in with this perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that capturing people's stories about how their lives have changed is how you do that. So I think about, speaking with childcare providers who literally said to me that if they did not have this service, they would have closed their businesses and they would have just not been able to do it anymore. It would have been, a great tragedy in their life. And capturing a story like that, and then I was so it was amazing to see how they were wanting to share that story. The people who are benefiting from these services, and that they were proud to share that story. And so I think, carefully navigating that in trying to get those named stories is really important part of evaluation. And I'd be happy to talk to you more about that, because it is tricky to navigate that, but it is important.
Great, that was incredible. We've reached the end of our program. I feel like we could have probably gone on for another half hour, but I want to say, first of all, thanks again to the amazing Alison LaRocca, and of course, all of you who took the time to attend. And I just, again, so grateful for your support and sharing of information with one another in the chat. It's really wonderful to witness. So you'll be receiving a super quick survey about your experience. And of course, we welcome your feedback and any ideas for future Williams at Work webinar topics. Just on the off chance that you might want to present something, we are sharing a link to the Williams at Work webinar submission form in the chat. As Alison was kind enough to mention earlier, we try to make it seamless and, dare I say, enjoyable. We'll also be sending you a copy of Alison's presentation deck, as she said, and a link to today's recording. A few of you were asking about that. And, really, we hope that you'll share it with other folks, in your network who might benefit, because that's what it's all about. Super quick note to those of you who are 2s and 7s. If you're coming back for reunion, please stop by the EAF meetup on Saturday afternoon. This is a very casual networking event with designated industry chat hubs, and including one for nonprofits. So it's a super easy way to meet alumni who do what you do. It's 3:30 to 5 on Saturday afternoon. It's in a new location this year, the faculty club. So we could kind of have an indoor-outdoor type of setting, given the state of the world. And so finally, just on behalf of my colleague, Caitlin Cohn, who's running things behind the scenes, it's where all the magic happens. And, from all of us working for you here in the Purple Valley, have a great rest of the day.